The rhythmic whir of the industrial floor buffer was my lullaby, my constant companion in the cavernous, concrete heart of Titan Tower. Down here, 30 feet below street level, the world upstairs, the hushed whispers of corporate deals, the clack of keyboards, the endless hum of ambition, was just a distant, benign murmur. My kingdom was the basement. Miles of steam pipes like metallic serpents, the thrumming generators, the labyrinthine service tunnels that smelled perpetually of ozone, dust, and a faint metallic tang. Arthur Jenkins, janitorial engineer, at your service. Or rather, at the service of the grime, the spills, the forgotten corners. It was Tuesday, 8:47 a.m. Rush hour was long past, the breakfast pastries in the executive lounge already reduced to crumbs. My shift officially ended at 9. Just a few more passes with the buffer, a final sweep of the loading bay, and I could clock out, crawl into my ancient Chevy, and drive home to my silent apartment. Maybe grab a cheap beer and watch some trash TV. A perfect, unremarkable Tuesday. Then the silence broke. Not the abrupt, shocking kind, but a sudden absence of sound. The distant murmur from above, the subtle vibration of the elevators, even the hum of the HVA system, they all just faded, replaced by a strange, hollow quiet that pressed in on me like an oppressive weight. I cut the buffer. The sudden stillness was deafening. My own breathing sounded harsh in my ears. A high-pitched, brittle scream tore through the quiet. It was from above, unmistakably human, and ended with a wet, sickening gurgle. My heart hammered against my ribs. What the hell was that? My first thought was a construction accident, though we hadn't had any major work since the new lobby was installed. But that scream, it wasn't pain. It was pure, unadulterated terror. I walked toward the metal stairwell door, the one that led up to the ground floor lobby. My steel-toed boots echoed on the polished concrete. Another sound, closer this time. A series of rapid, muffled thumps, like something heavy being dragged across an expensive carpet. Then a crack, sharp and loud, like a whip, followed by a frantic, high-pitched shriek. It wasn't a construction accident. This was worse. My hand hovered over the cold steel of the stairwell door handle. My gut twisted into a knot. Every instinct screamed at me to open it, to see what was happening. But a deeper, colder instinct, one honed by years of seeing things I wasn't supposed to, urged caution. I retreated to my small, grimy office, a sanctuary crammed with mops, buckets, and half-empty containers of industrial cleaner. My radio, usually tuned to a soft rock station, sat on my cluttered desk. I grabbed it, my fingers fumbling with the volume dial. Static. Nothing but static. Then a voice. Faint, crackling, barely intelligible. Multiple breaches. Quarantine protocol. Stay. Indoors. The signal cut out, replaced by a garbled shriek that sounded less human and more animal. My blood ran cold. Quarantine? Breaches? This wasn't a construction accident. This was something else entirely. Something big. Something terrible. I moved to the small security monitor I kept in my office. It was a leftover from a defunct system, hooked up to a few cameras covering the basement loading docks and the main service elevator. Just as I looked, the screen flickered, showing a grainy black and white image of the main loading bay. Empty. Peaceful. Then a blur. A figure sprinted across the frame. Not a uniformed delivery driver, but a man in a rumpled suit, his face a mask of panic. He glanced over his shoulder, his eyes wide with an unspeakable terror, before vanishing out of frame. Behind him, something else moved. A dark, hunched shape, too fast, too erratic to be normal. The monitor dissolved into snow. The power flickered, then died completely. My office plunged into near darkness, illuminated only by the faint emergency lights from the hallway, casting long, dancing shadows. The rhythmic thrum of the generators, usually a comforting backdrop, had stopped. The building was bleeding power. The Titan Tower, this gleaming monument to corporate power, was dying. And the apocalypse, I realized with a chilling dread that settled deep in my bones, wasn't something happening out there. It was unfolding, floor by agonizing floor, right above my head. And I, Arthur Jenkins, the janitor, was watching it all begin from the basement. I was at the bottom of the world, and the world was falling apart, piece by terrifying piece, right on top of me. A profound, horrifying question echoed in my mind. When the world collapses, what happens to the man below? The quiet didn't last. It never does. The screams started again, this time closer, sharper. Not the distant, muffled sounds of before, but distinct, raw shrieks of pure agony and terror, punctuated by snarls that weren't quite human. It was like a nightmare was bleeding through the concrete ceiling. My hands, still fumbling with the useless radio, trembled. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the sounds weren't going to stay upstairs. They were coming for the basement. They always do. The main stairwell door, the one I'd eyed earlier, rattled. A single hard thump against the metal, followed by a guttural moan that sent shivers down my spine. Someone, or something, was trying to get in. I scrambled from my office, my eyes darting around the small stretch of hallway that led to the loading bay. This was my domain. I knew every pipe, every conduit, every hidden nook. And I knew the vulnerabilities. The loading bay doors, a pair of massive industrial steel barriers, were the weakest point. Designed for forklifts, not for holding back a tide of whatever that was. I ran toward them, my heart pounding a frantic drum solo against my ribs. My eyes scanned for the control panel. Manual override. Had to lock them down. My memory, a messy archive of mundane details, finally pulled up the schematic. Upper right corner, red lever. I yanked it down with all my might. The heavy doors groaned, a faint metallic shriek, and a series of heavy bolts slid into place with satisfying, booming clunks. Not enough. Nothing was ever enough in the face of what I was hearing. I looked around the loading bay, a vast concrete expanse usually bustling with activity. Now it was silent, save for the horrifying symphony above. Pallets, half-empty containers, and a discarded forklift sat like forgotten monuments. My gaze landed on a stack of industrial-sized storage containers, thick metal boxes meant for long-term archiving. Heavy, very heavy. "All right, Art," I muttered, my voice thin and reedy in the sudden silence of my own doing. "Time to earn that janitor salary." I grabbed the controls for the forklift, a machine I'd only ever used to move particularly stubborn garbage compactors. The engine sputtered, then roared to life, filling the basement with a welcome, if temporary, sense of power. I drove it to the stack of containers, carefully maneuvering the prongs underneath the first one. The air vibrated with the machine's rumble. It was a risky move. The noise was sure to draw attention, but the alternative was letting them in. What would you do? Let the silence consume you, or make noise to secure what little safety you had left? I chose noise. I chose action. Slowly, agonizingly, I lifted the first container, its immense weight making the forklift strain. I pushed it against the loading bay doors, blocking them further. Then another and another. Sweat plastered my hair to my forehead. My muscles screamed. The pounding from the stairwell intensified, a relentless rhythm that chipped away at my resolve. Thump, thump, scrape, thump. The steel groaned, a sickening sound of metal being bent and tested beyond its limits. Just as I wedged the third container into place, creating a formidable, if temporary wall, a sickening crack echoed from the stairwell. A section of the door, just above the handle, bent inward. A sliver of darkness appeared, then widened, and then an eye. Milky white, bloodshot, completely devoid of pupil. It stared through the gap, unblinking.
Behind it, a low, guttural growl, like a trapped beast. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't just a scream now. It was a threat, and it was here.
The single dead eye staring through the splintered stairwell door was a silent, horrifying confirmation. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was the end. And the end had milky white eyes and a hungry growl. I scrambled away from the loading bay, abandoning the forklift, the rumble of its engine now a beacon rather than a comfort. My breath hitched in my throat. The stairwell door continued to groan and creak under an unseen assault. They were trying to get through. It was trying to get through. What did they want? My terrified mind supplied the obvious answer: me. My tiny office, with its broken security monitor and useless radio, suddenly felt like the most vulnerable place on Earth. I needed something more, something solid. My gaze landed on the heavy, reinforced door to the server room, tucked away in a quiet corner of the basement. Thick steel, biometric scanner, backup generators. If anywhere could hold, it was there. But it was far, on the other side of the main corridor, past the janitorial supply closets, past the main access tunnels. "Think, Art, think," I mumbled, my voice barely audible over the increasing commotion. The loading bay door shuddered, the improvised barricade of containers groaning under a new, sustained assault. The dead eye vanished from the stairwell door's crack, replaced by more splintering wood and the sound of something wet being dragged against metal. I sprinted toward the server room. The hallway was long, dim, illuminated only by the flickering emergency lights that cast grotesque shadows. Every echo, every creak, every distant moan made me jump. My trusty mop bucket, filled with dirty water and a squeegee, sat innocently by a wall. A faint, almost sickly sweet smell, like rotten fruit and stale blood, began to permeate the air. It was faint down here, but distinct, and it made my stomach churn. As I neared the server room, the corridor turned a corner. My heart leaped into my throat. Two figures were stumbling out of one of the open janitorial closets, their movements jerky, unnatural. One was a young woman, her stylish corporate dress torn, a dark matted stain across her chest. Her jaw hung slack, her eyes glazed over, fixed on some unseen point beyond me. The other was a large man in a security guard uniform, his face contorted into a silent scream, his arms outstretched, fingers twitching. They weren't running, they were shambling. They weren't looking, they were sensing. They smelled me. I froze, my breath caught. My mind screamed contradictory orders: run, fight, hide. The two infected, sensing my presence, slowly turned their heads. Their gazes, empty and cold, fixed on me. A low gurgle rose from the woman's throat, a sound of profound hunger. The security guard let out a wet, rasping moan. Their pace quickened, that unnatural, lurching shuffle gaining speed. I had no weapon, just my wits and years of navigating these hidden passages. I knew the basement. I knew its secrets. This was my territory. "All right, you overgrown meat bags," I whispered, a desperate defiance rising in my chest. "Let's see how well you know my basement." I pivoted, not toward the server room, but toward the sprawling network of maintenance tunnels. A narrow, dark opening, barely taller than me, big enough for one person at a time. Too small for the security guard to move quickly, too confusing for anything without a map. My flashlight, a heavy-duty model I always carried, was clipped to my belt. I tore it free, clicking it on. The beam cut a stark path into the oppressive darkness of the tunnels. "Come and get me," I snarled, a lie designed to distract, to draw them away from the server room. I burst into the tunnel, not looking back, knowing they were right behind me. The server room door, my potential sanctuary, felt a million miles away now. But for a janitor who'd seen it all, the true depths of the basement were more than just a hiding place. They were a weapon. The maintenance tunnels were a claustrophobic nightmare, a spiderweb of concrete passages, thick with dust and the metallic scent of rust and damp earth. My flashlight beam, my only guide, danced erratically across corroded pipes, flickering electrical conduits and dripping condensation. The air was thick, suffocating. Every breath was a rasp in my throat. Behind me, the shambling footsteps of the two infected echoed, distorted and amplified by the enclosed space. Their moans, a low, constant drone, vibrated through the very floor. They were closer than I expected. That unnatural speed. It wasn't a sprint, but it was relentless. I knew these tunnels better than I knew my own apartment. I'd spent countless hours down here, replacing filters, tracking leaks, patching up emergency wiring. It was a secret world, unseen by the office drones upstairs, a necessary artery of the building. Now it was my only hope. Left, right, crawl space, vent shaft, I chanted under my breath, my mind racing through the mental map I'd built over 2 decades. The key was to lose them in the labyrinth, to use the building's own guts against the things that now infested it. I squeezed through a narrow gap between a hot water pipe and a concrete column, my shoulder scraping painfully. The security guard, larger, slower, struggled to follow. I heard a grunt, a tearing sound, then a frustrated guttural growl as he got momentarily stuck. A small victory. But the woman was nimbler. Her smaller frame allowed her to navigate the tighter turns with grotesque ease.
I could hear her wet, gasping breaths right behind me. My heart hammered. I needed to open a loop, create a diversion, now. Up ahead, a junction, 3 paths. Straight ahead led deeper into the sub-basement, a forgotten section nobody had touched in years, rumored to be unstable. Right led to the emergency generator room, a dead end. Left, a series of even narrower passages, eventually leading back toward the main basement corridor, but through a treacherous, half-flooded section. My janitor's instinct screamed, water. Water could be a weapon or a trap. I veered left, splashing into ankle-deep frigid water. The floor here was uneven, slick with algae. My boots lost traction, and I nearly went down. The infected woman behind me didn't hesitate. She plunged into the water, her moans turning into a more desperate splashing sound. The security guard, finally free, was gaining again. "Come on, Art, you old dog," I wheezed, pushing myself faster. The air was getting colder, the water deeper. Up ahead, I saw it, a broken pipe, spewing a steady stream of icy water onto the floor, creating a small, treacherous waterfall effect. Perfect. I slid through the narrow opening beyond the pipe, using the slickness to my advantage. The water here was chest deep. The passage was barely wide enough for me, let alone the security guard. I braced myself against the wall, flashlight clenched in my teeth, and waited. The infected woman plunged into the gushing water, her ragged clothes instantly soaked. The cold didn't seem to bother her, but the sheer force of the current made her stumble. Her footing was precarious. I watched, hidden in the shadows, as she struggled, her head lolling from side to side, her arms flailing. She was blind, sensing only heat and sound. And then the security guard tried to follow. He hit the main flow of the broken pipe with a sickening splash, his heavy body caught by the current. He lost his balance immediately, tumbling into the chest-deep water with a resounding crash. His moans turned into a choked gurgle as the frigid water engulfed his head. He thrashed, trying to regain his footing, but the slick algae and the strong current were too much. He slammed into the concrete wall with a wet thud, his head hitting the unforgiving surface. For a second, he went still. The woman, hearing the commotion, turned, trying to reach for him. But the current was too strong. She slipped, her leg twisting at an unnatural angle, and she fell with another splash, going under the water. Her head bobbed back up, mouth open, gurgling. This was my chance, an open loop of escape. They were struggling, not dead, not yet, but slowed. I needed to press the advantage.
I turned, not looking back, and plunged deeper into the winding, waterlogged tunnels, the distant sounds of their struggles fading behind me. Every step was a gamble, every turn a potential dead end. But I was moving, and movement, in this new world, meant survival. What would you have done? Stayed to fight or taken the chance to run? The escape into the deeper flooded sections of the tunnels bought me precious minutes, but no true safety. The chilling cold of the water had seeped into my bones, and my soaked clothes clung to me like a second, heavier skin. The faint, sweet smell of decay seemed to cling to the very air, a constant reminder of the chaos above, a taste of the apocalypse that had so brutally unfolded. My teeth chattered, but it wasn't just the cold. It was the knowledge that those things, those infected, were still down here. I stumbled out of the waterlogged passage, gasping for air, into another network of dry but equally desolate service tunnels. This section led toward the sub-basement's rarely used boiler room, and, more importantly, a hidden access point to the main building's ventilation shafts. My mind, still racing, calculated the risks. Climbing through the vents? Claustrophobic, dangerous, but potentially a way to bypass floors, a janitor's secret passage. But first, warmth. A moment to catch my breath. The boiler room was up ahead. A blast of dry, dusty heat washed over me as I pushed open the heavy, rusted steel door. The air inside was thick, smelling of hot metal, stale oil, and old dust. The massive boilers, dormant now that the power was out, stood like silent, monstrous guardians. But at least it was dry. At least it was warm. I leaned against a cold metal pipe, my chest heaving. The silence here was different from the earlier quiet. It was a heavy, oppressive stillness, broken only by the drip of condensation and the frantic pounding of my own heart. I pulled out my flashlight, the beam sweeping across the room. Shadows danced, transforming mundane shapes into grotesque figures. Every creak of the old pipes, every sigh of the ancient machinery made me flinch. I shivered, trying to wring some of the water from my shirt. My thoughts, for a moment, drifted back to the world before. To my ex-wife, Sarah, who always complained about my late shifts. To my son, Michael, now grown, probably in some other city, hopefully safe. What was happening to them? Was he even alive? The guilt of not being with them, of being a janitor trapped in a basement while the world burned, was a crushing weight. This wasn't how I'd envisioned the end. No heroic last stand, no valiant sacrifice. Just a janitor, hiding. What kind of man did that make me?
A low, scraping sound from the far end of the boiler room snapped me back to the present. My blood ran cold. I wasn't alone. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, landing on a shadowy corner. A figure was emerging from behind a stack of old, corroded pipes. It was hunched, its limbs long and gangly, moving with a disjointed, twitching motion. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes glowed faintly in the gloom, a sickening yellowish green. This wasn't one of the corporate zombies from above. This was different, more feral, more ancient. It was a sewer worker. I knew him, Old Man Miller. He'd been down here for decades, a legend among the building staff, famous for his reclusive nature and his endless grumbling shifts in the true underbelly of the city. He'd retired years ago, but sometimes I swore I still heard him muttering in the deep tunnels. Except this wasn't Old Man Miller. This was something twisted, something wrong. He wasn't moaning, he was hissing. A low, sibilant sound that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. His head tilted, listening, sensing. The smell of decay was stronger now, mixed with something else. Something putrid, like stagnant water and rotten flesh. I had to move, now. He was between me and the ventilation shaft access, and he was faster than he looked. This was a peak of terror, a visceral, primal fear I hadn't felt since I was a child. What do you do when the very ground beneath you is rotten and the dead rise from places you thought were safe? My eyes darted around the boiler room, searching for anything, a wrench, a length of pipe. My gaze landed on an old rusted pry bar lying by a stack of defunct Persia gauges. Heavy, solid. It was a janitor's tool, designed for leverage, for brute force. Now it was a weapon. I lunged for it, my movement startling the Miller thing. It hissed again, a sharper sound, and shambled forward, its speed startling. Its arms, grotesquely elongated, shot out, fingers twitching, reaching. I grabbed the pry bar just as it lunged, its putrid breath washing over me. The smell alone was enough to make me gag. I swung, hard. The rusted metal connected with a sickening crunch against its skull. The Miller thing stumbled, but didn't fall. It screeched, a sound that tore at my eardrums, and swiped at me with a clawed hand. I felt a searing pain across my cheek as its filthy nails raked my skin. Blood welled up, hot and sticky. Rage, pure and animalistic, surged through me. This was my basement, my world, and this thing, this twisted mockery of a man, was defiling it. I swung again, this time aiming for the chest, for the center of its mass. The pry bar slammed into it with a sickening thud. The Miller thing reeled backward, stumbling over a pile of old copper tubing. It hit the concrete floor with a heavy crash, its limbs twitching, its hisses fading into a low, desperate whine. It wasn't dead, not yet, but it was down. I stood over it, pry bar raised, chest heaving, blood dripping from my cheek. The greenish glow in its eyes was still there, flickering with malice. It tried to push itself up, its muscles straining, but the impact had clearly done some damage. I hesitated. Kill it or move on? Every fiber of my being screamed to make sure it was finished. But the noise would attract more. The tunnels were a vast echo chamber. This was a valley of decision. What would you do? Take the time to ensure the threat was gone, risking discovery, or push forward, leaving a potential danger behind? I looked at the ventilation shaft access, a small dark opening in the upper wall. Escape, safety, the unknown. But definitely not here, not with this thing slowly, agonizingly trying to rise. I made my choice, a quick, brutal end. With a grunt, I brought the pry bar down again, aiming for its head. The sound was wet, final. The greenish glow in its eyes flickered, then died. Silence fell, heavy and profound, broken only by my ragged breathing and the distant, almost imperceptible thrum of the burning city above. My cheek stung, a constant reminder of how close I'd come. The boiler room, once a sanctuary, now felt like a tomb. I had to move. The ventilation shafts were my only path now, my only way to ascend from the basement and see what horrors truly awaited me. The climb would be long, the air would be thick with dust and unseen dangers, but it was my janitor's path to survival. The ventilation shaft was a narrow, dark maw in the wall of the boiler room, smelling faintly of stale air, metal, and accumulated dust. It was a climb, pure and brutal, through a lattice of corroded metal grates and jagged ducts. My pry bar, now slick with the dried blood of the Miller thing, felt like a lead weight in my hand, but I couldn't part with it. It was my only companion, my only defense. Climbing was slow, agonizing work. The shaft was designed for air, not for a man, especially not one carrying tools and a history of bad knees. My soaked clothes chafed, and the cut on my cheek pulsed with a dull ache. Every upward pull on the rusty ladder rung, every desperate reach for a higher vent, sent a tremor through my exhausted muscles. Dust, thick and ancient, rained down on me, coating my face and hair, filling my lungs. I coughed, the sound echoing hollowly in the enclosed space. My flashlight beam bounced erratically off the metal walls, creating a disorienting kaleidoscope of shadows. The air grew thinner, warmer, smelling less of subterranean damp and more of burnt plastic and something acrid, the stench of a burning city. It felt like I was climbing up the throat of a dying beast, its last breaths hot and foul. I tried to recall the building schematics, the blueprints I'd seen scattered in the old maintenance office. The Titan Tower had two main vent shafts, one on the east, one on the west. This one, the west shaft, ran vertically all the way to the executive floors, with access points on every third floor. My internal monologue was a desperate mantra: third floor, sixth, ninth. After what felt like an eternity, my gloved hand brushed against a metal grate, a release panel. I fumbled with it, the rusted latch resisting my shaking fingers. Finally, with a painful groan of strained metal, it gave way. I pushed it open, revealing a sliver of light. Not the harsh fluorescence of office space, but the muted, reddish glow of a city burning. I was on the 9th floor, accounting. The irony wasn't lost on me. From the boiler room to accounting, the vertical journey of a lifetime. I squeezed through the opening, dropping onto a dusty carpet with a quiet thud. The 9th floor was a scene of eerie, preserved chaos. Cubicles, pristine and orderly just hours before, were now overturned. Chairs lay scattered, some shattered. Papers were strewn everywhere, like confetti from a macabre party. A half-eaten sandwich sat on a desk, a mug of cold coffee beside it. It was a snapshot of a moment when normal life abruptly ended. The air was thick with the smell of scorched plastic and stale fear. The sounds of distant sirens, choked by smoke, wailed faintly. The windows were the first thing I noticed. Massive floor-to-ceiling panes that usually offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline. Now they were a horrifying panorama. Smoke plumed from dozens of buildings, black tendrils clawing at the orange-red sky. Fires raged, painting the glass in terrifying hues. And down below, on the streets, tiny figures moved. Not cars, not people walking to work, something else. Too many, too erratic. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming. The apocalypse truly had unfolded, and it wasn't just my basement, it was everywhere. I backed away from the window, a wave of nausea washing over me. This was the real world now. This was what I'd climbed into. My eyes scanned the desolate office space. Silence. A profound, echoing silence, broken only by the distant sounds of destruction. But this silence felt different. It was a predator silence, a temporary lull. I needed supplies, food, water, maybe something to tend to the cut on my face, and a way to move through this architectural tomb. This office, this monument to the mundane, was now a dangerous landscape.
I crept forward, my pry bar held defensively, every nerve ending screaming. What would a janitor look for? The places everyone ignored, the supply closets, the mini fridges in the break rooms, the forgotten corner desks. I moved with painstaking care, my eyes sweeping every desk, every overturned bin. A discarded laptop, still flickering with a screensaver of a family vacation. A framed photo of a smiling couple. These relics of a lost world amplified the horror. These were people, just like me. And now? A sudden sharp creak from the far end of the office froze me in place. My breath hitched. I dropped into a crouch, pry bar raised. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the sound itself. It was the silence of something waiting, listening. My eyes strained into the gloom. Was it one of them, or something else? The memory of Old Man Miller's glowing eyes flashed in my mind.
This wasn't just a simple climb. This was a treacherous ascent into a world I barely recognized, a world that was now irrevocably broken. And the higher I went, the more I'd see. The more I'd realize just how deeply the apocalypse had settled into every corner of this city. And my isolation, my unique vantage point from the basement, was now my gravest vulnerability. The creak had been too precise, too deliberate, to be merely the settling of the building. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. I pressed myself against a cubicle wall, my breathing shallow, my gaze fixed on the source of the sound, the open doorway to the executive lounge. My grip on the pry bar tightened, the rough metal digging into my palm. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant, muffled symphony of the city's demise. Was it gone, or was it waiting? This emotional peak, this unbearable tension, was a torment. My mind raced, presenting horrifying scenarios. A lone infected, perhaps drawn by the subtle sounds of my own breathing. Or worse, a desperate survivor, equally terrified, equally dangerous. Hello? My voice was a thin, reedy whisper, barely audible, betraying the raw fear that gnawed at me. Is anyone there? Silence. Then, a low, guttural growl, followed by the distinctive, dragging shuffle of feet. Not human. Never human anymore. My blood ran cold. It was one of them. And it was in the executive lounge. I knew that lounge. Plush leather sofas, expensive art, a fully stocked bar, and a small private kitchen. If anywhere had forgotten snacks or sealed water bottles, it was there. But the risk? I needed a plan, fast. I looked around my immediate vicinity. Rows of cubicles, a few potted plants, discarded office supplies. Nothing for defense, but plenty for distraction.
My gaze landed on an overturned waste bin, its contents, mostly paper, scattered. A thought sparked. Noise. I grabbed a handful of discarded files and crinkled plastic bottles, hurling them with all my might toward a far corner of the office, away from the lounge. The papers rustled, the plastic clattered, echoing loudly in the stillness. The growl from the executive lounge sharpened. The shuffling footsteps quickened. The infected was moving, drawn by the sound. Show, don't tell, was no longer just a storytelling device, it was a survival strategy. Let them follow the noise, let them chase the ghost. As the sounds of the infected moving toward my diversion intensified, I took my chance. I darted toward the executive lounge doorway, moving low and fast, my pry bar held ready. I peered around the frame, my eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the lounge's own massive windows. It was a man in a crisp suit, or what was left of it. His tie was askew, his shirt stained with a horrifying mix of dark fluid and something else. His face was gray, slack, one eye missing entirely, the socket a black hollow. He was tearing at a framed landscape painting, his teeth gnawing at the canvas, oblivious to the fact that it wasn't food. The diversion had worked. I moved into the lounge, keeping low, my eyes darting toward the small kitchen area. My goal was simple: get in, get supplies, get out. The air here was heavy with the smell of stale liquor and the same sickly sweet decay that now defined the outside world. I tiptoed past the infected executive, who continued its grotesque meal of oil paint and linen. My heart was a drum in my chest, threatening to burst. Every step was deliberate, every breath controlled. I reached the kitchen door, pushed it open silently, and slipped inside. The kitchen was a mess. Overturned chairs, spilled coffee grounds, a broken plate. But on the counter, a few individually wrapped granola bars, still sealed. A small, expensive coffee machine, and next to it, a forgotten bottle of filtered water. A jackpot. I grabbed the granola bars, stuffing them into the pockets of my utility vest. The water bottle, half full, went into another pocket. My eyes scanned for anything else. Bandages? A first aid kit? A small cabinet, usually locked, stood ajar.
Inside, a compact first aid kit. I snatched it, my fingers fumbling as I unzipped it. Antiseptic wipes, gauze, medical tape. A small but crucial victory. I dabbed an antiseptic wipe on the cut on my cheek. It stung like hell, but it was clean. Just as I turned to leave, a crashing sound from the lounge. The infected executive had torn the painting from the wall, sending it to the floor with a splintering crash. It turned, its one good eye swiveling wildly, searching for a new target. The diversion was over. It had found me. I froze. The kitchen door was too small, too flimsy to barricade. I was trapped. The executive, sensing my presence, began to shuffle toward the kitchen, its guttural growls growing louder, more urgent. This was it. The kitchen, the heart of the executive lounge, was now my battleground. I clutched the pry bar, my knuckles white. There was no escape, only a fight. The constant struggle, the relentless pursuit, the psychological toll, it was all part of the apocalypse unfolding around me. And in this moment of raw, visceral terror, I knew I had to make an impossible choice: fight or be consumed. What would you do when cornered, with no way out and only a janitor's tool as your defense? The executive, infected, its one eye glowing with a malevolent hunger, filled the kitchen doorway. Its grimy fingers twitched, reaching. The smell of decay was overpowering now, mixed with the cloying sweetness of stale blood. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate to escape. This was a peak moment of raw, primal fear. I had no firearms, no blades, just the heavy, rusted pry bar, an extension of my desperate will to live. "Come on then, Mr. Executive," I muttered, a desperate attempt to find courage. "Let's see if those quarterly reports taught you how to fight." It lunged, not with speed, but with a terrifying, heavy momentum. I sidestepped, my body screaming in protest, the old knees complaining. The executive slammed into the counter where I'd just been, sending plates and mugs crashing to the floor. It roared, a wet, animalistic sound, and spun clumsily, its head lolling at an unnatural angle. My chance. I swung the pry bar, aiming for the back of its skull. The metal connected with a sickening thwack that vibrated up my arms. It wasn't the clean, skull-shattering blow I'd delivered to Old Man Miller. This one was denser, perhaps thicker bone. The executive stumbled, a deep gash appearing at the back of its head, but it didn't fall. It merely roared again, louder this time, and turned back to me, its single eye blazing with renewed fury. Damn it, headshots. I knew that. But in the moment, in the raw chaos, precision was a luxury I couldn't afford. It lunged again, its arms outstretched. I ducked, feeling its filthy fingers brush my hair. The pry bar, still clutched in my hand, swept outward, catching its legs. It lost balance, its heavy body collapsing onto the tiled floor with a bone-jarring thud. This was it. No hesitation, no second thoughts. I brought the pry bar down, repeatedly on its head. Each impact was a sickening crunch, a wet crack. Black fluid erupted from the wounds, splattering onto my face, mixing with my own blood from the earlier cut. It thrashed, its limbs twitching, its roars fading into desperate gurgles. I didn't stop until the movement ceased, until the last gurgle died in his throat, until its single, malevolent eye went completely dull and lifeless. When it was over, I stood there, chest heaving, the pry bar still gripped in my shaking hands. My muscles screamed in protest, my body ached. My face was smeared with its foul ichor. I felt sick, disgusted, but also alive. Horribly, terrifyingly alive. This wasn't just survival, this was a transformation. From janitor to killer. The quiet horror of the basement had given way to the visceral brutality of the upper floors. I cleaned the pry bar as best I could on a discarded curtain, the fabric absorbing the viscous fluid. The taste of blood was in my mouth, whether my own or its, I couldn't tell. I grabbed a few more sealed water bottles from a small refrigerator, more valuable than gold now. My backpack, an old canvas army surplus bag I used for tools, was starting to get heavy with these small treasures. The memory of the burning city outside, glimpsed from the 9th floor, gnawed at me. I was still in the middle of this giant, metal beast, Titan Tower. And what if there were other survivors, other dangers? My isolation, once a comfort in the basement, now felt like a curse. I needed to move, but where? Up? Down? The vent shaft exit was closed, a temporary sanctuary, now a potential trap. I couldn't go back down to the flooded tunnels. Going up meant encountering more of them, more executives, more horrors. This was a crucial open loop. Every direction felt like a death sentence. My gaze fell upon a fire exit door, usually alarmed, now silent, lifeless. It led to the fire escape, a series of metal stairs clinging to the side of the skyscraper. Exposed, dangerous, but also an escape, a way to bypass the infested stairwells. Taking a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay outside, I pushed the heavy bar. The door groaned, but opened. A blast of wind, carrying the acrid scent of smoke and distant screams, hit me. I stepped out onto the narrow metal platform, high above the ruined city. The view was even more terrifying now, unfiltered by glass. The sky, a bruised purple-orange, reflected the inferno below. Sirens wailed, then died. Gunshots echoed, then faded. This was the apocalypse, laid bare. And then I saw them. Not on my floor, but on the floor below. A small group of people, huddled together on the fire escape, looking up, their faces pale with despair. Survivors. My heart leaped, then sank. They hadn't seen me yet, but they were there, and they were trapped. This changed everything. My solitary survival, my janitor's hidden path, was no longer enough. The decision pressed upon me, heavy and undeniable. Join them or continue alone? The human dilemma, stark and unforgiving. What would you do? Risk your life for strangers or prioritize your own survival in a world that had gone completely mad? I didn't know the answer, but the universe, in its cruel way, had just given me a choice. My presence on the fire escape, high above the burning city, was a jolt. The small group huddled on the floor below startled, their heads snapping up. 5 of them, 2 men, 2 women, and a child, maybe 10 years old, clutching a tattered teddy bear. Their faces were etched with a terror I knew all too well. For a moment, we just stared, silent. 5 pairs of eyes, all lost, all searching for answers in line. "Hey!" The louder of the 2 men, burly and sweating in a stained dress shirt, finally found his voice. "Who are you? Are you infected?" His hand went to a small, ornamental letter opener he clutched like a dagger. "No," I called back, my voice hoarse. "I'm not infected. Name's Art. I was the janitor." The irony of my introduction was bitter. I came up from the basement. A collective sigh of relief, though still laced with suspicion, wafted up. "Thank God," one of the women whispered, her voice trembling. "We thought we were the last ones." The man with the letter opener, who introduced himself as Mark, gestured for me to come down. "Come on, Art, we need to stick together. What's it like up there? Are there many of them?" This was the open loop, the moment of decision. Trust or isolation? My gut screamed caution. Every survivor story, every movie warned against strangers. But the sight of the child, wide-eyed and terrified, pulled at something deep inside me. I was a janitor. I cleaned up messes. Maybe I could help clean up this one too. Maybe this was a chance at redemption. I descended the metal stairs, the sound of my boots scraping echoing unnervingly in the vast, empty air. The group watched me with a mixture of hope and fear. As I reached their landing, they introduced themselves. Mark, the burly man, a mid-level manager. Sarah, the trembling woman, an administrative assistant.
David, a quiet, almost catatonic programmer, clutching a laptop bag. Emily, another administrative assistant, looking tough despite the dry tears on her face. And young Lily, Sarah's daughter, her face tear-streaked, clutching her teddy bear. They were survivors from the 8th floor. They'd been trying to make it to the ground level, but the stairwells were overrun. The fire escape was their last resort.
"The whole building's gone," I said, my voice flat, relaying the horrors of the basement, the Miller thing, the executive from the lounge. "The streets are worse. Fires everywhere. The sky is bleeding." Emily nodded, grim-faced. "We saw it from our office. We heard the explosions. The military, they're bombing the city." Bombing the city. The full weight of the apocalypse truly settled then. Not just a zombie outbreak, total societal collapse. This was far beyond anything I'd ever imagined. My janitor's training, my knowledge of hidden passages, suddenly felt woefully inadequate against an enemy that consumes cities. "We need a plan," Mark said, trying to assert some leadership, though his voice wavered. "We can't stay on this fire escape. What do we do?" "We need to get to the ground," I said, pointing downward. "But not this way. It's too exposed. There could be more of them in the building, drawn to the sound. And down on the streets, it's a death trap." "So what then, janitor?" David, the quiet programmer, spoke for the first time, his voice surprisingly sharp, laced with despair. "We jump?" "No," I said, my mind racing, drawing on my intimate knowledge of the building's infrastructure. "There's another way, a service elevator shaft. It goes all the way down to the sub-basement. If we can get to the 7th floor, I know a maintenance hatch. We can rappel down it." Sarah gasped. "Rappel? Are you insane? We have a child." "It's safer than the stairwells," I insisted, "and safer than being out here on the streets. The sub-basement connects to the old subway tunnels, abandoned mostly, but a way out, a way under the city, away from the bombs, away from them." Mark looked at me, a flicker of something in his eyes. "Hope? Desperation? You really think we can make it?" "I don't know," I admitted, looking at the bruised sky, the smoke-choked horizon. "But I know this building better than anyone. I know its hidden paths, and I've survived worse in the basement." It was a bold claim, a janitor boasting about his domain, but it was true, and it gave them something to hold on to. "How do we get to the 7th floor?" Emily asked, her voice more pragmatic. "The main stairs are gone, and the elevators are dead." "We use the service stairs," I said, pointing to a small, inconspicuous door a few yards down the fire escape landing. "It's rarely used, usually locked, but I have the master key. Or at least I did." I patted my utility belt. The ring of keys, my janitor's badge of honor, was still there. This was a choice for them. Follow the janitor, the man from the basement, or stay put and become another statistic in the city's fiery collapse. The clock was ticking. The sky grew darker, the fires brighter, casting grotesque shadows on the faces of my new, accidental family. The psychological dread was back, but now it was communal. My fate was tied to theirs, and theirs to mine. "All right, Art," Mark said, taking a deep breath, trying to be a leader. "Lead the way. But if you get us killed..." His threat hung in the air, unfinished, unnecessary. We all knew the stakes. This was a new loop, a terrifying gamble. The only way was forward. The only way was through. And the path ahead was dark, filled with the unknown horrors of an apocalypse unfolding around us. The small, nondescript service stairwell door was a thin barrier between the desperate hope of our small group and the unknown terrors within Titan Tower. My master key, a heavy brass piece I'd carried for years, slid into the lock with a rusty clunk. The tumblers turned, a surprisingly loud sound in the eerie silence, and the door opened with a slow, agonizing groan. A gust of stale, metallic air,
laced with the familiar stench of decay, washed over us. Mark, ever the cautious leader, peered inside. The stairwell was dimly lit by emergency lights, a spiraling concrete tunnel of oppressive silence. "Anything?" he whispered, his letter opener held ready. I shook my head. "Just the quiet. That's always the most dangerous sound." We moved as a unit. Emily went first, then Sarah, clutching Lily, her small body pressed against her mother's side. David, silent and still, followed. Mark brought up the rear, his eyes scanning for threats. I was the scout, my pry bar held defensively, my senses on high alert. This was my building, but it was a building possessed. The descent was slow. Each step echoed. We tried to be quiet, but the metal stairs groaned, our boots scraped, and Lily, despite her mother's comforting whispers, let out a small, terrified whimper every now and then. We passed floor after floor, each one an identical tableau of despair. Empty offices, overturned furniture, the lingering scent of fear, and something far worse. The only difference was the severity of the damage. Some floors looked merely abandoned, others like a battleground. The apocalypse was an artist of chaos. On the 7th floor, my target, the air was thicker, heavier. A faint rhythmic scratching sound echoed from one of the office doors. Scratch, pause, scratch, pause. My stomach clenched. "Stay here," I whispered, holding up a hand. "Wait by the stairwell." I crept toward the office door, my heart pounding. The scratching intensified, a maddening, persistent sound. I peered through the narrow window panel in the door. The office beyond was dark, but a sliver of light from the outside filtered through a broken window, illuminating a horrific scene. A woman, or what was left of her, was crouched over a desk. Her head was bald, covered in deep, jagged lacerations. Her body was clad in a torn lab coat. She was methodically, relentlessly scratching at the wooden surface with her fingernails, digging deep furrows into the veneer. Her face was pressed against the wood, and from her throat came a low, rasping purr like a grotesque cat. She was not feeding, she was mutilating. A new, terrifying facet of their behavior. I backed away silently, my skin crawling. This was not the kind of monster you could reason with. This was something driven by a primal, deranged instinct. It's occupied," I whispered to Mark, my voice barely steady. "A lone one, distracted. We need to be careful." We bypassed the office, reaching the service elevator shaft. A massive, gaping hole in the floor, descending into the absolute darkness of the sub-basement. "Here," I said, pointing to a heavy steel hatch in the wall. "This is the access to the maintenance ladder. It goes all the way down, then we're in the old subway tunnels." But the hatch was sealed. 4 massive bolts, rusted and stubborn, held it in place. My pry bar, my trusted companion, would barely make a dent. "We need a wrench," I said, scanning the dimly lit corridor. "Something heavy, something with leverage." Mark nodded, his eyes darting around. "David, you're good with tools, right? Seen you fix your server racks with a paperclip." David, the silent programmer, finally stirred. "Maybe. I might have some tools in my bag, but it's back on the 8th. I dropped it when they came." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. A new loop, a new dilemma. His bag, his tools, were our only way to open the hatch. But going back to the 8th floor, to where they'd last seen the infected, was a massive risk. "Can you describe it?" I asked. "Where exactly?" "Under my desk, in my cubicle, next to the window." David pointed vaguely back toward the service stairwell. His eyes were wide with a silent horror. "I'll go," I said, surprising myself. It was my building, my expertise, my duty somehow. "Mark, stay here with the others. Guard the hatch. Emily, Sarah, keep Lily safe. David, you stay with Mark. Be ready to tell me exactly where that cubicle is." Mark hesitated. Art, you sure? It could be crawling with them up there. I'm a janitor, I said, a grim smile touching my lips. I clean up messes. This is just a bigger mess than usual. This was my self-imposed challenge, my way of taking back control, my solo mission into the teeth of the apocalypse. I left them at the hatch, a small, terrified huddle in the oppressive gloom, and started my ascent back up the service stairs toward the 8th floor. Each step was a gamble. The scratching woman on the 7th was still there, her purring growing fainter but still present, a constant reminder of the grotesque things that now inhabited this building. The silence above was deafening, pregnant with unseen threats. I was walking back into the fire, willingly. What kind of person does that? A janitor, a survivor, a fool. Only time would tell. The ascent to the 8th floor felt longer, heavier than the entire journey up from the basement. Every step up the steel service stairs was fraught with a renewed sense of danger. I was no longer fleeing, I was hunting, a solitary figure moving through a tomb. The silence of the 8th floor was even more profound than the 7th, a thick, suffocating blanket that pressed in on me. No scratching here, no distant moans. Just the sound of my own ragged breathing, amplified by my terror. David's cubicle, under his desk, next to the window. The details, sparse as they were a lifeline. I crept through the abandoned office space, my pry bar held ready, its weight a comforting presence in my hand. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating overturned chairs, spilled coffee, and the scattered detritus of abruptly abandoned lives. It was an archaeological dig of a dead world. The familiar, sickly sweet smell of decay was stronger here, almost cloying. My stomach churned. This was a recent kill zone. My eyes darted from cubicle to cubicle, searching for any sign of movement, any shadow that might detach itself and lunge. Every desk held a story, a half-finished crossword, a child's drawing, a framed photo of a smiling family. The mundane became chilling, a testament to the lives extinguished without warning. I found David's cubicle near the panoramic window, the same kind I'd seen on the 9th floor, now reflecting the inferno of the city in a bruised purple and orange glow. The scene inside his cubicle was grim. His chair was overturned, a dark, viscous smear on the carpet where it had fallen. The desk was askew, and tucked underneath it, half hidden by a fallen monitor, was a black laptop bag. His. Our objective. But beside the desk, a figure lay slumped. A woman in a dark business suit, her head at an unnatural angle, her eyes wide and staring. Dark fluid had pooled beneath her. She was definitely dead. And nearby, a man in a matching suit, his face a gray mask, his jaw hanging open. He was stirring, not dead. Not yet. My blood ran cold. He was slumped against the cubicle wall, his head twitching. The rustling of my movement, however faint, had caught his attention. He let out a low, wet gurgle, pushing himself slowly, agonizingly to his feet. His movements were jerky, uncoordinated, like a puppet whose strings were cut and retied by a drunkard. He was close, too close. And the space was tight. "Damn it," I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had to get the bag. I had to get out. The infected man, a mid-level manager I vaguely recognized from the cafeteria, shambled toward me, his arms outstretched, his fingers twitching. He was blocking the only way out of the cubicle. This was an open loop, a moment of intense crisis. I couldn't just rush him, not in this confined space. I needed to move fast, precisely. My gaze flickered from the infected to the laptop bag. It was within reach. Almost. "All right, Mr. Manager," I muttered, a cold determination replacing my fear. "One more performance review for you." I held the pry bar ready, waiting for him to commit. As he lunged, his putrid breath washing over me, I didn't step back.
Instead, I ducked under his outstretched arm, a desperate, low movement that put my head perilously close to his snapping jaw. My shoulder slammed into his chest as I moved, knocking him off balance just enough. In that fleeting second, as he stumbled, I twisted, bringing the pry bar up and around in a savage arc. It connected with the side of his head, just behind his ear, with a sickening crack. He gasped, a wet, choked sound, and went down with a heavy thud, his limbs twitching violently. I didn't pause, not for a second. My hand shot out, grabbing the strap of the laptop bag. I yanked it free, hearing the sound of something tearing. I turned, pry bar still ready, but he was down. Still, but twitching. He wasn't fully dead, but he was incapacitated. I didn't have time for a final blow. I had to get back to the others. I scrambled out of the cubicle, not looking back, the laptop bag clutched tightly in my hand. The weight of it, the tools inside, was a promise of escape. But the memory of his twitching limbs, the almost human desperation in his gurgles, haunted me. Every death, every kill, was a chip off my soul. This was the cost of survival. This was the constant psychological dread of the apocalypse unfolding around me. I sprinted back toward the service stairwell, my boots echoing loudly on the silent floor. I didn't care about the noise now. I just needed to get back. Back to Mark, Sarah, Emily, David, and Lily. Back to the small glimmer of hope, the fragile promise of a collective escape. The tools were in my hand. The way down, potentially, was open. But the climb had tested me. The kill had changed me. And the journey, I knew, was far, far from over. My return to the 7th floor was a desperate rush, driven by the urgency of the moment and the terrifying possibility that the scratching woman might have moved. I burst through the service stairwell door, chest heaving, the laptop bag clutched in my hand, my pry bar still gripped.
Mark and the others flinched at my sudden appearance, their faces etched with a mixture of relief and renewed fear. Lily let out a small sob, burying her face deeper into Sarah's side. "Got it," I gasped, dropping the bag at David's feet. "The 8th floor, it's cleared, for now." I didn't mention the twitching manager. Some details were best left unsaid. David, still pale and shell-shocked, knelt down, fumbling with the zipper. He pulled out a small, heavy wrench and a set of Allen keys. His fingers, surprisingly steady despite his earlier catatonic state, went to work on the rusted bolts of the maintenance hatch. Clink, clank, groan. Each sound was deafening in the silence, a beacon for anything that might be lurking. The pressure was immense, a silent clock ticking down against our fragile hopes. "How long will that take?" Emily whispered, her eyes darting nervously toward the service stairwell door, as if expecting a horde to burst through. "Depends on the rust," David mumbled, twisting the wrench with surprising force. "Could be minutes, could be an hour." An hour. In this new world, an hour was an eternity. My gaze drifted to the service elevator shaft. It was a dark, square abyss, smelling faintly of stagnant air and machine oil. This was our path down. This was our leap of faith into the unknown. "We need a rope," Mark said, voicing my own thoughts. "Something to tie around us. We can't just fall." My janitor's brain, a repository of the mundane, kicked in. "Fire hoses," I said, pointing up. "Every floor has them. Reinforced canvas, strong as hell. We can tie a few together. Might be enough to reach the bottom." "Someone has to go up and get them," Sarah whispered, clutching Lily tighter. "Risk being seen." "I'll go," Emily said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I know where they are. I used to practice fire drills with my department." Her courage in the face of such despair was a small spark of hope. "2 of us," I corrected. "We stick together, always." I looked at Mark. "You're with me. Emily, you know the way." Mark nodded, his letter opener still clenched. "All right, janitor, lead the way." The trust, however grudging, was a fragile bond being forged in the crucible of chaos. This was another open loop.
Would our small team survive the next few moments, let alone the journey down the shaft? We left Sarah, David, and Lily at the hatch, a moment of profound psychological dread. Mark and Emily, armed with only their wits and a letter opener, followed me up the stairs. 2 floors up, the 9th. The executive lounge where I'd fought the gray-faced manager. The burning city outside, the source of our fire hoses. The 9th floor was eerily quiet.
The executive I dealt with was still slumped in the kitchen, a gruesome testament to my desperate fight. We moved fast, silently, through the cubicles, past the window overlooking the burning city. The stench of smoke was stronger here, mixed with the ever-present smell of decay. Emily led us to the emergency exit, where a bright red fire hose cabinet was mounted on the wall. She yanked it open, and the heavy canvas hose, coiled neatly, spilled out. "Got it," she whispered, her hand shaking slightly as she wrestled it free. As we were about to turn back, a distant, muffled crash echoed from the floor above. The 10th floor, followed by a frantic, high-pitched shriek. My blood ran cold. They were up there. And the sound? The sound indicated a new, perhaps more desperate threat. "Just one hose?" Mark whispered, his eyes wide. "We might need more." "There's another one on the 10th, Emily said, her voice barely audible. "Just up the stairs." This was the micro cliffhanger. Do we risk going up one more floor for more rope, or do we cut our losses and run with what we have? The gamble was immense. One more floor could mean another confrontation, another life-or-death struggle. But more rope could mean a safer descent, a better chance for Lily. One more, I decided, my voice firm, suppressing the tremor in my own gut. Just one more. Quietly. We crept up the service stairs, each step a gamble. The screams from the 10th floor had died down, replaced by a low, guttural growl that resonated through the concrete. My hand tightened on the pry bar. Emily, surprisingly, was steady, her eyes fixed on the fire hose cabinet at the end of the hall. We reached the 10th floor landing. The emergency light above us flickered, casting long, dancing shadows. The air was thick with the smell of blood and something metallic. The source of the growl was a few offices down, a terrifying, rhythmic sound. "Go," I whispered to Emily, pointing to the cabinet. "Get the hose. Mark, cover her. I'll watch the office." Emily nodded, her face pale but determined, and darted toward the cabinet. Mark took up a defensive position, his letter opener clutched in his trembling hand. I peered cautiously around the corner, my flashlight beam cutting into the darkened office. 2 of them, both men, still in suits, tearing at something on the floor. A woman's body, torn and bloody. The growls were coming from them, primal and horrific. They were feasting. The sight turned my stomach, but I had to hold my ground. They were too preoccupied, too engrossed in their gruesome meal to notice us yet. Emily wrestled the second hose free. The sound of it dragging across the floor was like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. The 2 infected stopped. Their heads snapped up, their eyes, milky and dead, turning toward us. "Run!" I hissed, turning, "back to the 7th." We didn't need to be told twice. We ran, the heavy fire hoses dragging behind us, the 2 infected shambling after us, their guttural growls echoing through the floor, amplified by the terror that now drove us. This was a peak of heart-pounding action, a desperate race against the new, faster predators. The descent into the unknown, through the service elevator shaft, was now our only option. And the clock was ticking, not just on the bolts David was working on, but on our very lives. The sounds of the infected pursuing us down the service stairs were a chilling reminder of how tenuous our escape was. Their guttural growls and the sickening thump of their feet echoed up the stairwell, growing louder with every frantic step we took. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but adrenaline fueled me. Emily and Mark were right behind me, dragging the heavy fire hoses, their faces pale with terror. We burst onto the 7th floor landing, gasping for breath. Sarah and Lily huddled against David, who was still frantically trying to loosen the rusted bolts on the maintenance hatch.
Clang! The wrench slipped, echoing ominously. "They're coming!" Mark yelled, pointing up the stairwell. "They're fast!" "How much longer, David?" I demanded, my voice raw. "Almost," he grunted, his face slick with sweat, his muscles straining. "One more, just one more." The scratching woman from the 7th-floor office, perhaps roused by the commotion, began her low, purring growl again, a new, unsettling note in the symphony of our impending doom. We were caught between two threats, the pursuers from above and the local terror on our floor. This was the pinnacle of our emotional roller coaster, every nerve ending screaming. I scanned the corridor desperately. The service elevator shaft, a gaping black maw, yawned before us. The maintenance hatch was still partially sealed. We needed to hold them off. We needed time. My eyes landed on an industrial-sized cleaning cart, the kind I used to push around, laden with buckets, mops, and a heavy industrial vacuum cleaner. "The cart!" I shouted, pointing. "Push it against the stairwell door." Mark didn't hesitate. He grabbed one side, I grabbed the other. With a grunt, we shoved the heavy cart toward the service stairwell door, blocking it just as the first infected, one of the suited men from the 10th floor, appeared at the landing, its milky eyes fixed on us. It slammed into the cart with a wet thud, shaking the door, but the cart held. For now. "David!" Sarah screamed. "Hurry!" The last bolt finally gave way, with a resounding crack that echoed through the entire floor. The heavy steel hatch swung open with a screech of rusted hinges, revealing a dark, vertical shaft with a narrow metal ladder disappearing into the gloom. Below, only an inky blackness. "All right, everyone," I shouted, grabbing one of the fire hoses from Emily. "Tie these together, fast!" My janitor's knots, once only for securing garbage bags, now had a far graver purpose. My fingers, surprisingly nimble despite their shaking, worked quickly, tying the two thick canvas hoses into a single, formidable rope. It was long enough, I hoped, to reach the sub-basement. "Who goes first?" Emily asked, her voice tight with fear. "Lily," Sarah said, her voice firm, clutching her daughter. "She's the lightest. I'll go with her." Mark grabbed the other end of the hose, wrapping it around a sturdy, exposed pipe, securing it with his own desperate knot. "Art, you know this shaft best. You guide them down. I'll cover from above." His leadership, once forced, was now earned. The cart at the stairwell door groaned under a renewed assault. The thin steel was visibly bending inward. We were running out of time. I helped Sarah tie the hose around Lily's small waist, securing her carefully. "Hold on tight, sweetie," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. Lily nodded, her small face pale, her eyes wide with terror, but surprisingly brave. "All right," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. "Sarah, you go next. I'll guide you down. Emily, David, you follow. Mark, you're last. Pull the rope down after you." Sarah took a deep breath, clutching Lily. I guided her to the edge of the shaft. The cold, dank air from below rushed up, smelling of earth and damp concrete. "Ready?" I asked. She nodded, her jaw clenched. Slowly, carefully, I lowered Lily, then Sarah, into the darkness. Their small forms disappeared into the abyss. The rope, taut in my hands, paid out smoothly. I could hear Sarah's muffled grunts, Lily's tiny whimpers as they descended. The minutes stretched, agonizingly slow. The banging on the stairwell door intensified, the metal groaning, threatening to give way. The scratching woman's purring grew closer. "They're almost through," Mark yelled, pressing his shoulder against the straining cart. "They're clear," Sarah's voice, faint but clear, echoed up from below. "Send the next one." Emily was next, her face grim. She tied herself to the rope, took a deep breath, and disappeared into the shaft. Then David, his silence unbroken, followed. My turn was coming. My stomach twisted with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The cleaning cart at the stairwell door finally gave way. With a loud, tearing crash, the door burst inward, sending the cart tumbling. 3 infected, the suited men from the 10th floor, piled through the opening, their growls filling the air. Their eyes, milky and dead, locked on to Mark. "Go, Art!" Mark screamed, turning, his letter opener flashing in the dim light. He plunged into the fray, a single, desperate act of sacrifice. I didn't hesitate. There was no time. I grabbed the hose, tied it around my waist, and slid over the edge of the shaft, my heart in my throat. The darkness swallowed me. I could hear Mark's desperate grunts, the wet snapping sounds of the infected, his dying screams fading as I descended. Guilt, sharp and cold, pierced me. I'd left him. I'd abandoned him. But what choice did I have? This was the impossible dilemma of the apocalypse, the constant compromise, the bitter taste of survival. My boots hit the bottom with a splash. I was in a flooded chamber, the water up to my knees. Sarah, Lily, Emily, and David were huddled together, their faces pale, their eyes wide with terror and relief. Mark was gone. A new, gaping loop had been brutally opened. "The subway tunnels," I said, my voice barely a whisper, pointing to a dark, arched opening. "This way, before they follow." We plunged into the darkness of the abandoned subway tunnels, leaving the horrors of Titan Tower, the screams of the dead, and the sacrifice of a good man behind us. The apocalypse had swallowed him whole, and we were still running, still searching for a way out. The air in the abandoned subway tunnels was thick with the smell of damp earth, rusted metal, and the faint, unsettling tang of stale urine. My flashlight beam cut through the oppressive darkness, revealing a cavernous, echoing space. Tracks, long corroded, snaked into the gloom. The silence here was different from the buildings, less threatening, more profound. It was the silence of something long dead, not something waiting. Yet. Our small group huddled together, gasping for breath, the echoes of Mark's final screams still ringing in our ears. Lily, clinging to Sarah, was sobbing silently. Emily's face was streaked with tears. David, still unnervingly quiet, stared into the darkness, his laptop bag gripped tight. I leaned against a cold, damp concrete pillar, the pry bar clutched in my hand, my body aching, my mind numb with guilt and exhaustion. He saved us," Emily whispered, her voice cracking. "Mark, he saved us." "He did," I agreed, my voice flat. The weight of his sacrifice pressed down on me. What kind of man let another die so he could live? A survivor. That's what I was becoming. A cold, hard truth that twisted my gut. We were in the forgotten veins of the city, miles of crumbling infrastructure, buried deep beneath the burning apocalypse above. This was my new basement, a sprawling, dark labyrinth. My janitor's knowledge extended to boiler rooms and ventilation shafts, not abandoned subway systems. This was new territory, a dangerous open loop, every turn a question mark. "Where do we go?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "How do we get out of here?" I swept my flashlight beam across a faded map pasted to a crumbling wall. These tunnels, they used to connect to the old city bypass, way out past the industrial district. There's an emergency access shaft about 5 miles west of here. Should lead up to an old maintenance yard. Could be a way out of the city. 5 miles? In the dark? Through these tunnels? It sounded impossible. But then, everything about the last few hours had been impossible. 5 miles? Emily gasped. On foot? In the dark? "We don't have a choice," I said. "Upstairs is a death trap. The military is bombing the city. Down here we might have a chance. No light, no sound. It's our best bet to avoid them." I didn't mention the possibility of the Miller thing mutations having spread down here. No need to add to their despair. We started walking, a grim procession into the unknown. I led the way, my flashlight beam tutting a path through the suffocating darkness. The air grew colder, heavier, smelling of stagnant water and something indescribably ancient. Every shadow was a potential monster.
every distant drip of water a heart-stopping sound. Lily, exhausted, eventually fell asleep in Sarah's arms. Sarah, despite her own fatigue, carried her with a fierce maternal strength. David, surprisingly, was a steady presence, his steps even, his gaze fixed on the ground ahead. Emily, though still jumpy, clung to a small shard of hope, talking in hushed whispers about her family, about wanting to get to the countryside. "What would you do when everything you know is gone?" Emily asked me softly, her voice barely a whisper, a rhetorical question meant to stir deeper thoughts, to become comment bait. "How do you keep going?" I looked at the flickering beam of my flashlight, at the faces of the survivors, my new, accidental family. "One foot in front of the other," I said, my voice rough. "One breath at a time. And you remember what you're fighting for. Mark, he bought us time. We can't let that be for nothing. We walked for hours. The miles stretched, each one an eternity. My muscles screamed, my feet burned. The cold seeped into my bones. We stopped occasionally to rest, sharing the granola bars and water I'd scavenged. The silence was broken only by our whispers, the distant rumble of what might have been another explosion from the city above, and the rhythmic drip of water. As the hours crawled by, a new sound began to emerge from the darkness ahead, a faint, high-pitched skittering.
Not heavy like the infected, lighter, faster, more numerous. My blood ran cold. "What's that?" Emily whispered, clutching David's arm. I clicked off my flashlight, plunging us into absolute darkness. The skittering grew louder, a chilling symphony of tiny claws on concrete. Something was moving toward us, something small, something fast, something that sounded like 1,000 tiny needles scraping across stone. Then a faint, sickly green glow appeared in the darkness ahead. Not one, dozens, hundreds. Tiny, glowing eyes, like malevolent embers, approaching rapidly. "Oh, God," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Rats?" No, these weren't normal rats. The green glow, the sheer number, the aggressive speed. This was another mutation, another horror spawned by the apocalypse, lurking in the forgotten corners of the world. This was the basement secret, revealed. This was a new, terrifying peak of the emotional roller coaster. We had escaped the tower, only to fall into a new, unseen nest of monsters. "Stay together," I hissed, clutching my pry bar, clicking my flashlight back on, revealing the horrifying reality. The tunnel ahead was teeming with them. Twisted, mutated rats, their furless bodies covered in pustules, their teeth elongated, their eyes glowing with that same familiar sickly green. They were swarming, a tide of living horror rushing toward us. What would you do when faced with a sea of mutated vermin, with no way to run, and only a janitor's tool as your defense? The answer, I knew, was simply to fight, or be devoured. The mutated rats were a living, skittering carpet of teeth and glowing green eyes, surging toward us with terrifying speed. Their squeals were a high-pitched, frenzied chorus that vibrated through the very bones of the tunnel. My flashlight beam, cutting through the darkness, revealed the horror in grotesque detail. Their furless, mottled skin, the raw, exposed muscle, the unnaturally long, needle-sharp teeth. This was the nightmare of the sub-basement unleashed. "Stay together," I roared, my voice raw with desperation, forcing myself to stand firm. "Back to back, don't let them swarm you." I clicked the flashlight off, plunging us into darkness once more. Their glowing eyes were now our only illumination, a constellation of malevolent green dots closing in. The overwhelming numbers, the sheer speed, were paralyzing. This was an ambush, a brutal twist in our journey through the apocalyptic labyrinth. "What do we do?" Emily screamed, her voice a thin thread of terror. "Fight!" I bellowed, clicking my flashlight back on, blinding a few of the lead rats for a precious second. I swung the pry bar, a wide, desperate arc. The metal connected with sickening thuds, sending small, broken bodies flying, their green eyes dimming as they fell. But for every one I killed, 3 more surged forward, clambering over their fallen brethren. Their tiny claws scraped against my boots, their teeth snapped at my shins. Sarah screamed as a rat leaped, biting into her calf. Lily shrieked, burying her face. David surprisingly reacted. He dropped his laptop bag, pulling out a small, heavy fire extinguisher from the wall beside him. He turned it on the rats, blasting them with a cloud of white foam. The sudden hiss and the cold spray momentarily repelled them, sending a wave of mutated vermin scrambling backward. "Good thinking, David," I yelled, bringing my pry bar down on another cluster of rats. The foam bought us precious seconds. "Gasoline!" Emily suddenly shrieked, pointing to a rusted, leaking barrel near an old maintenance alcove. "There's an old fuel cache here." My mind, racing, connected the dots. Gasoline, fire, a desperate, terrifying solution. But we needed a spark. "Lighter?" I demanded. "Anyone have a lighter?" Mark was gone. Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. Sarah was too busy trying to kick the rats away from Lily. David, methodical even in chaos, pulled out a small multi-tool from his pocket. "Got a ferro rod," he muttered, "but no tinder." "My scarf!" Sarah screamed, tearing at the tattered fabric around her neck. "Use this!" The rats, recovering from the fire extinguisher blast, were surging forward again, their glowing eyes fixed on us. We were surrounded. This was a dire cliffhanger, the kind where every second counts. The psychological dread was overwhelming, the physical threat immediate and relentless. I grabbed the scarf, stuffing it into the leaking barrel, soaking it in the thick, pungent gasoline. The smell was overpowering, acrid and intoxicating. David, with surprising speed, struck the ferro rod, sending a shower of sparks onto the fuel-soaked fabric. It ignited with a sudden whoosh, a blazing torch in the darkness, illuminating the terrifying horde of mutated rats. "Now what?" Emily screamed over the din of their squeals. "Fire!" I roared, grabbing the flaming scarf. "Keep them back!" I swung the makeshift torch, a blazing circle of fire that kept the rats at bay. Their squeals turned into terrified chirps as the flames lashed out. The heat was intense, the light blinding. It was working. We were pushing them back. The tunnel, once a tomb, was now a furnace. "The side tunnel," David shouted, pointing to a narrow opening I hadn't noticed, half hidden by crumbling debris. "It leads to a different section, away from them." This was it, our chance, a path through the fire. "Move!" I yelled, waving the flaming scarf, creating an opening. "Sarah, Lily, go! David, Emily, follow!" Sarah, clutching Lily, her face grim with determination, plunged into the side tunnel, the firelight casting grotesque shadows on their retreating figures. Emily and David scrambled after them, their movements clumsy in the restricted space. I stayed behind, swinging the torch, keeping the wall of fire between us and the overwhelming tide of mutated rats. Their squeals of terror were almost drowned out by the roar of the makeshift torch, the heat radiating off it intense, almost unbearable. My hand, holding the burning fabric, was searing hot, but I gritted my teeth. This was my sacrifice, my turn to buy them time. My chance to finally act like a protector, not just a survivor. But the scarf was burning down, the flames licking closer to my hand. The rats, emboldened by the weakening fire, were starting to press forward, their glowing eyes fixed on me, on the last, desperate barrier between them and their prey. The open loop of escape was closing. The fire was dying. And I was alone, surrounded by a sea of green-eyed, mutated horrors. My janitor's courage, my janitor's tools had brought me this far. But would it be enough to survive the final, terrifying moments of this underground nightmare? This was my last stand, the end of the line, deep in the forgotten arteries of a world that had gone completely mad.
The flames from the gasoline-soaked scarf licked at my fingers, the heat searing, the light flickering. The wall of mutated rats, momentarily pushed back, was pressing forward again, their green eyes blazing with renewed hunger. Their high-pitched squeals were deafening, a prelude to being devoured. I could feel their tiny claws scraping at my boots, their foul breath washing over me. This was the moment of truth, the terrifying cliffhanger. "Art, come on!" Emily's voice, faint but urgent, echoed from the side tunnel. My eyes darted to the narrow opening. They were through. They were safe. For now. This was my last chance. I let out a guttural roar, a sound born of fear and desperation, and swung the last remnants of the flaming scarf in a final, desperate arc. The fire lashed out, momentarily stunning the leading rats. In that instant, I plunged into the side tunnel, not looking back. The heat of the fire and the stench of burning fur assaulting my senses. I stumbled through the narrow passage, my body screaming in protest, my lungs burning from the smoke and the exertion. My hand was raw, blistered. I emerged into a slightly wider, equally dark tunnel, gasping for breath, collapsing against the cold concrete wall. Sarah, Lily, Emily, and David rushed to me, their faces etched with fear and relief.
Lily hugged my leg, her small hands clutching my blood-soaked jeans. "You made it," Sarah whispered, tears in her eyes. "Thank God you made it." "The fire, it won't hold them forever," I wheezed, my throat raw. "We need to keep moving." My flashlight, still clutched in my good hand, cut through the darkness. This section of the tunnel was different, older, the concrete crumbling, the air heavy with a more ancient, musty smell. The rats, thankfully, had not followed. The fire had bought us time, a precious, fragile gift. We walked for what felt like hours, the silence of the tunnel broken only by our footsteps and the occasional drip of water. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but now it was laced with a strange, nascent hope. We were out of Titan Tower. We were out of the immediate path of the mutated rats. We were still alive. "How much further to the access shaft?" Emily asked, her voice tight with exhaustion. I consulted the mental map of the old city schematics, rusty but still present in my janitor's brain. "Should be just past this next bend. There should be a maintenance ladder, a grate leading up." We rounded the bend, and there it was, a vertical metal ladder, rusted but sturdy, disappearing into a narrow shaft. And at the top, a faint, almost imperceptible sliver of light. Sunlight, or what passed for it in this ruined world. A new open loop, a new potential way out. "Up," I said, pointing. "This is it, the way out." David, ever the practical one, went first, testing the ladder, his laptop bag slung across his back. He climbed with a slow, methodical rhythm, disappearing into the shaft. Then Emily, her strength surprising. Sarah followed, Lily strapped to her back in a makeshift sling made from one of the fire hoses. I brought up the rear, my pry bar still in hand, my eyes scanning the darkness behind us, half expecting a new horror to emerge. The climb was long, arduous. My burnt hand throbbed with pain. My body ached from the earlier fights, from the endless running. But the promise of light, the lure of the outside world, pulled me upward. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, my head broke free of the shaft. A blast of cold, clean air hit me, and light, real light, not the infernal glow of burning buildings, but the muted, gray light of a dawn in a ruined world. We were in an abandoned maintenance yard, surrounded by chain-link fences, rusting machinery, and overgrown weeds. The air was crisp, tasting of smoke and something else, fresh rain. The ground was wet, muddy. Above us, the sky was a bruised canvas of dark clouds, hinting at recent downpours. The world had cried. "We made it," Sarah whispered, collapsing onto the muddy ground, Lily still clutched tight. "We actually made it." But made it was a relative term. We were out of the tunnels, but we were still in a ruined city, or on its very edges. The sounds of distant explosions, faint but present, still rumbled. The sky, though no longer orange with fire, was dark and foreboding. The apocalypse, I knew, hadn't ended. It had just moved above ground. "Now what?" Emily asked, her voice filled with a fragile hope, an open loop. "Where do we go?" I looked at the others, my new, accidental family. Sarah, exhausted but resilient, clutching her daughter. Lily, still terrified but alive. Emily, strong, determined. David, silent but steady, a surprising rock in the chaos. And me, Arthur Jenkins, the janitor, no longer just a cleaner of messes, but a survivor, a fighter, a guide. "We find a vehicle," I said, my voice hoarse but firm. "We head for the countryside, away from the cities, away from the bombs. We look for other survivors. We find a place to start over." "You think there's a place like that?" Sarah asked, her eyes searching mine for an answer. I thought about the horrors of Titan Tower, the basement, the executives, the Miller thing, the mutated rats. I thought about Mark's sacrifice. I thought about the thousands, millions of people who hadn't made it. "I don't know," I admitted honestly, looking at the bruised, apocalyptic sky. "But we're alive. We found each other. And as long as we keep moving, as long as we keep fighting, there's always a chance." This was the new truth. The world was broken, but we were not. The apocalypse had unfolded, and I, a janitor who saw it all from the basement, had survived. My journey from the quiet depths to the brutal surface had transformed me. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with more dangers, more impossible choices. But we were together, and that, in this new, terrifying reality, had to mean something. It had to. The cold rain began to fall, washing away some of the grit and grime, but not the memories, not the fear, not the determination. We were survivors, and the long, grueling fight for a future was just beginning.